journalist and a scholar in the field of communication. So we'll have tonight a very interesting presentation where he is looking into how Buddhism can influence and improve our communication, make it more effective and perhaps a little bit more kind as well. Before we do that, we'll have a short meditation session, and this time it will be led by our friend Sisi. She will do the meditation, and after that Dr. Kalinga will give the presentation, and after the presentation, as always, we have a Q&A session. So, Sisi, please take over.
Thank you. So good evening everybody, welcome to our meditation. So my first question is, has everybody meditated before? Is somebody new to meditation? Anybody new? Yes. Okay, so I will have a short explanation about shamatha meditation, what I will explain very briefly. Shamatha means a peaceful meditation, which is a very natural technique. First of all, the position you are having, you sit. So when you start your meditation, you say, I sit, because that's what you're doing. I sit. And then what you would like to observe, your head should be higher than your knees. If you feel your knees is higher, so you would need to have a pillow. Yes. So we have maybe some of those mats. So if somebody feels the knees are too high, you would need to have a cushion to sit higher. The reason is to open, and you don't want to inflict yourself with tensions. Then next, you have to straighten up your spine gently. The meditation is to be gentle with yourself. So you straighten up your spine to keep a straight position. And also your head, you would like to take in a little bit. And the tongue, you will touch the palate. Alright? And what you can imagine is to have a golden string coming through your spine down to keep a beautiful alignment. Next, you would like to pull your shoulders back, you roll it back, but gently. So you breathe in, and you roll your shoulders back, and then you breathe out, you can drop your shoulders. Because the meditation, you should not be too firm, not rigid, it's semi, not soft. So because you want to sit straight, yes, and soft, you have to be tender. So during the meditation, we breathe in and breathe out. So when we breathe in, at the beginning especially, you want to breathe in 3 times. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3. Hold. Hold. 1, 2, 3. And then breathe out. Usually the out breath is longer, but we can count to 3. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out. So breathe in is usually a little bit shorter. 1, 2, 3. Hold. 1, 2, 3. And then breathe out. But we do it gently and slow until you're quite settled in your body. So when we meditate, we can keep your eyes closed or keep your eyes open. If you open your eyes, you have a downcast
Okay. Good evening, and also Mark, thank you very much, Wellness, for the introduction and the invitation to speak here. Now, as you said, I'm of Sri Lankan origin. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, but then exactly 50 years ago, my family migrated to Australia, and I was originally trained as an engineer. And I worked for 7 years as an engineer, then switched to media. And I worked for the International News Agency for a number of years as a correspondent covering Australia, South Pacific, and also many other countries. So then I switched on to academia, where I moved to Singapore. And I was first teaching at Polytechnic for 5 years, and after that, working at a university in a media research center as head of research and also lecturer. And so I'm not a Buddhist scholar, nor am I a meditation teacher. That's why Sisi did the meditation today. I'm an international communications scholar. Is it? Right, you will see those books which I have written, which was published in the last 5 years or so. It's all on international communications. And it's basically looking at the cultural differences, because I have been very critical of the Western media, because I experienced myself in Australia. That's why I moved to Singapore. It's not political censorship. It's a kind of cultural censorship, which is there globally. So I have been writing about that, about geopolitics, and the last one was about the alternatives to Western hegemony in international news. Now, there's another book coming up by the same publisher in India, which is called Protecting Asia's Buddhist Heritage. That's based on a field research I did for 18 months in 2018 and 2019. I visited almost all Buddhist communities in Southeast Asia and South Asia. I had a grant from the Dalai Lama Foundation in India, a travel grant to do the research. So it's the book from that which will come out in January. So my focus is mainly nowadays looking at how Buddhist concepts from the Buddhist philosophy can be applied into communication. I was involved in a project at Chulalongkorn University in 2017 and 18. I was there working on the project as a coordinator because we got funding from UNESCO to develop curriculum to train journalists we call communicators. The project was called Mindful Communication for ASEAN Integration. The idea was to bring in Eastern philosophical ideas into a journalism curriculum, because it's been dominated by Western and indirectly Christian ideas. So I worked with two Thai academics. Project was called Mindful Communication for ASEAN Integration. Now we have changed it to Mindful Communication for Sustainable Development. I will talk about it later. In fact, this talk is mainly about that topic. So what I'll be looking at is the concept of Paticca Samuppada in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, how it applies to that, and also communicating compassionately. That's the idea behind the Mindful Communication project we did. Now, you may know Bhikkhu Payutto, and in his book, Buddha Dhamma, he explained Paticca Samuppada, or dependent origination, simply as when this exists, that come to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. So basically what he's talking about is the theory of impermanence, which I will come to soon. Now the Buddha presented the principles of dependent origination as a law of nature, which does not rely on the emergence of a Buddha or a divine power for its existence. So Buddha presented it as a natural truth. So this talk explores how this natural truth impacts on today's environment, the environmental crisis, and how we can adopt Buddhist philosophical concepts to communicate practical solutions to address this crisis and address also the sustainable development goals. Now, interestingly, if you look at the 17 sustainable development goals, I'll show you the chart later on, and they are very much in sync with the dependent origination theory. I don't think the United Nations realized it when they introduced it. So when we look at Buddhist, when you look at it, you can see the connections. Now, also also I will look at anicca, which is impermanence, and the three poisons, which is lobha, greed, dvesha, hatred, and moha, which is delusion, and how the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path as the basis of developing a new paradigm in development communication. We are using those concepts from Buddhism because they are so secular. You don't need to be a Buddhist, and we are not trying to convert people to Buddhism by introducing this. This is very secular. So when you look at journalism and culture, like I mentioned before, and I have been concerned, especially in recent years, about the way we practice the profession. We have been teaching for last 50, 60 years. I don't know, anyone done mass communication, studied journalism or mass communications here? No. If you study, one of the first things which we taught you is the libertarian media function theory, which underlines what we call the Western free media model of the media being the watchdog of abuse of power by governments. Also that says that theory says that you should have two opposing points of view to balance a story, which means you create a conflict. So that's my concern. Journalism has become so adversarial. And nowadays I don't watch television news, so you get depressed. It's all about war, floods, earthquakes. You can't find anything good being told about anything. Okay, I have already talked about that. I think let me go to the next one. So how do you communicate for harmony? Now this is the concept of mindful communication is what I would call harmony journalism. Sometimes people may call it peace journalism because peace journalism has been there for some time. And we are trying to bring some Eastern ideas into this. So that's why I prefer to use the word harmony, harmony journalism. So because now the fact that journalism is so much built around reporting conflicts. Now I can remember when my son, who grew up in Australia, now he's 40, when he was about 8 years old, he came and showed us a video which the teacher has filmed. They have gone in Australia, in Sydney. They have gone on an excursion to some place and they were told to sit in front of a camera and read a news item. So when we watched it, he read a news item saying, today in Sri Lanka, there was a bomb blast and the army has bashed and killed so many people. So I asked, why did you say that? You have been to Sri Lanka 2 or 3 times with us so far. You haven't seen that happening in Sri Lanka. Then he said, no, I was asked to read news. And that's what I did. Because he sits down with us in the evening, and while we have dinner, we watch television news. And that's what he sees all the time, bomb blasts, bashing, and wars. So this is the problem we need to address. So what we need is to look at how we can promote harmony as a part of our journalism practice, and I prefer to call it we are training communicators rather than journalists because of that watchdog journalism principle, which is associated with journalism. So we want to get away with that type of thinking. So let me look at some ideas which is at the very root of the Buddhist philosophy. Now, one is the Kalama Sutra. Now, I can remember when I was teaching at Nyan Polytechnic in Singapore, I had students who are 17, 18-year-old. And in the classroom, we used to talk about religion in terms of communication. And a lot of these young people say we are free thinkers. Then I find that almost all of them come from either Buddhist or Taoist families. And now, when I asked, a number of times I have discussed with the Buddhist, the students who come from Buddhist backgrounds, they say why they say free thinkers is because when they grew up, the parents used to take them to temple, they offer flowers to Buddha, the joss-sticks to Buddha, and then they listen to chanting for about an hour or so, which they don't understand. And when they ask the parents to explain, parents say, no, just do it, it's to gain merit. So when they become teenagers, they think it's a superstition. And a lot of them come across evangelical Christians who say the same thing, and I can't blame them becoming Christians. So I used to tell them, I used to talk to them about Kalama Sutra. I don't talk in the classroom, but I used to privately talk to them about the Kalama Sutra, which is about free thinking. And the Buddha preached it 2,500 years ago. In the sermon, in the Kalama Sutra, he sheds light on the basis of Buddhist social philosophy. Now you will see the principles. There's 10 principles there about how to approach a conflict or a communication issue. It includes views not to be accepted due to revelation or tradition, hearsay, authority of sacred texts, logical format, and so on. You see the issue. So we can say that sermon can be summarized as assurance on free inquiry, salvation without a savior, and also the right to dissent. So it very much agrees in line with the liberal Western thinking. Then let's come to sufficiency economics or Buddhist economic theory. In 1997, Thailand faced an economic crisis. It was called the Asian economic crisis. And a lot of people were trying to commit suicide. And I can remember a monk called, I can't remember his name, he told me that they used to come to a temple because they were in debt and they couldn't pay off the debts. So the king, Bhumipol, came up with this idea of sufficiency economics. In fact, it comes from the Buddhist philosophy. So he sort of repackaged it. And okay, so now he said economic development must be done step by step. it should begin with the strengthening of our economic foundations by assuring that the majority of our population has enough to live on. Once reasonably progress has been achieved, we should then embark on the next step by pursuing more advanced levels of economic development. Being a tiger is not important. This is, at that time they were talking about tiger economies in Asia. The important thing is for us to have a sufficient economy. A sufficient economy means to have enough to support ourselves. We have to take a careful step backwards, and each village or district must be relatively self-sufficient. Now, I can remember reading a report by the UN Development Program on this issue of sufficiency economy. There was one example I can still remember with Thai tourism. For example, when you have a tourist hotel in a rural area, your menu need to produce from the farms around there, not cheese and wines and things from outside. Then what you use for cleaning and all that, brooms and all that, should come from local produce brooms, not imported ones. That is like the idea of a sufficiency economy. So it's a method of development based on moderation and prudence, and there's 3 principles involved in it. Like what you see there, moderation is sufficiency at a level of not doing something too little or too much at the expense of oneness or others. For example, producing and consuming at a moderate level. Reasonableness is the decision concerning the level of sufficiency must be made rationally with consideration of the factors involved and careful anticipation of the outcomes that may be expected from such action. Risk management is the preparation to cope with the likely impact and change in various aspects by considering the probability of future situation. As you may know, we always talk about that Buddhism is a middle path. Buddhism encourages a middle path, not extreme on either side. So this is very much a middle path economic policy of sufficiency. Bhikkhu Payuttu argued that ethics are important in economics, and he gives the example of the ethical values. If you factor ethical values into economic theory or the way you look at the economy, then he asks the question, why isn't a nourishing meal is accorded more value than a bottle of whiskey? At the very heart of Buddhism is the wisdom of moderation. So when the goal of economic activity is seen to be satisfaction of desires, economic activity is open-ended and without clear definition. Desires are endless. Desires are greed. So what happened with this push by the king for sufficiency economics when Thailand recovered from the crisis, and then the governments came to power, led by Thaksin Shinawatra, very business-oriented governments, and they were not exactly interested in this type of idea. They were more concerned about economic growth, and also being businessmen around the government, they were also greedy for profits. So it didn't really take off here. Though in recent years there's been attempts to reintroduce the idea into government thinking. Now, today we see a similar problem in the US. The American dream is based on debts, taking loans, and endless consumption. So you live a lifestyle which you cannot afford. So now you find Trump blaming others for taking advantage of America and importing into America. And now why were they importing into America? Because Americans were buying. They were buying and buying. It's like what you call a consumer society. And you consume by taking loans. But that is not only a problem with America. I was giving a talk at one university recently, and I warned the Chinese students, you be careful about the Chinese economic model as well. Okay, so it's a problem everywhere. You need to have that balance. Otherwise, you get into debt, and you can't blame others for that. Then Bhutan came across. You may know Bhutan, very small, landlocked country, a kingdom, Buddhist kingdom. They came across this idea of what is called gross domestic product, or it's, gross national happiness, as opposed to a gross domestic product. Now, gross domestic product is DGP, as you have heard. GNH is happiness. So how do you see the two? Now, GDP is based on a model which makes the country like Qatar or even Singapore with a per capita income of, let's say, Qatar. With a per capita income, they have 133,000. Their per capita income, so they are supposed to be the world's richest country. But about 2/3 of their population are migrant labor, mainly from South Asia and Southeast Asia, like Philippines and Indonesia. And they are living under slave conditions. They are basically slave labor in those countries, not paid well, not treated well. So is it progress? Can you look at that figure and say this country is the world's richest country and it's progress? So on the other hand, now I can remember when I was working in Singapore, Singapore boasted that at that time, this was almost 20 years ago, front page of Singapore newspaper said Singapore is the world's richest country along with Qatar, with at that time it was 60,000 per capita. Then our secretary in the office at the university brought that article, showed it to me, and I had to ask the boss, where's my other 35,000? Because I get paid only 25,000 a year, my salary. So again, because Singapore has a very high ratio of billionaires to the population, and also Singapore, like Qatar, have about more than a million migrant labor who are very lowly paid. So these are not really indications of human happiness or human growth. Okay, so then when you look at the gross national happiness as the opposed to the GDP, there are 4 pillars which encompass the gross national happiness. It's sustainable and equitable socio-economic development, environmental conservation, preservation and promotion of culture, and good governance. So those needs to be taken into account, and there's an index which has been developed, and in fact, United Nations has adopted it, and I think Ireland has adopted it as well. And there was one other Western country looking at it, rather than GDP, to adopt this, because that brings in the social factors of a society and balance it with the economic factors. So this national happiness idea is very much based on very Buddhist approach to economic development and a middle path lifestyle. So now, when you also look at this question about environmental conservation, preservation and promotion of culture, equitable social economic development, all these points, I was in Bali last year. I went there after about 20 years. And first time when I went, I loved it. And last year when I went, I hated it. because too much people, and it has spoiled everything. Now same is happening to Sri Lanka and Thailand with too many people, too many tourists, because when tourists start coming in, people get greedy and you encourage more tourists to come. Then the very attraction for which they come get destroyed. So again, it's about how you get that balance. Again, that principles of sufficiency economics needs to be factored into this development policy. Then we come to what is called tree whistle, the three poisons in Buddhism. These are three fundamental mental states which identifies as the root causes of suffering and obstacles to harmonious living. So the three poisons are greed, which is lobha, hatred or anger, which is dvesha, and delusion or ignorance, which is moha. And the three wholesome states are generosity, dana, these are Pali words, loving kindness, maitri or metta in Pali, and wisdom, prajna. So how do you factor these into development policy and into economics? Because it is useful to think of the three poisons as a process that involves our insatiable urge to possess that which we desire, and the ensuring aggravation that arises when we don't get what we want to have, or what we don't want forced upon us. These lead to hatred of the other. So if you look at today's geopolitical tensions, it is clear that what drives these conflicts are the three poisons. And the media continue to be trapped in a definition, in a delusion of resolving these conflicts by militarization. What is lacking in today's media is the wisdom to understand the delusion behind this greed for control of resources, and thus an inability to craft a communication strategy that would promote cooperation, understand the root causes of this grab for resources, and the need to control one's craving by developing aspects of generosity and compassion. A humanistic feeling towards people who are being subjected to inhuman treatment and misery in the process of the grab for these resources. Now, when you look at all these geopolitical conflicts, first it was oil, now it's what you call these minerals, which goes into batteries and electric cars, rare minerals. Now that has become, next will be water, access to water. So now people go to war. At the moment, America is trying to attack Venezuela. Because they have world's biggest reserves of oil. But that's not what we have been told. Okay, so that then creates hatred. And you can see Middle East everywhere, how hatred is created, how this so-called terrorism happens because of greed for resources. You don't negotiate and come to a understanding of a balance extraction of these resources. You want to grab everything for yourself. And then the other side starts to hate you. And they will also get into terrorist attacks and whatever as a result of it. Now, very often, because I have been reporting, I have been specializing in development reporting, and I report on these issues so often, the development issues. In fact, I can remember one time when my son was a teenager, used to ask me after I go on assignments and come back, he sees the pictures. And he asked me, what is nice in these shanties you go all the time? Because I go into shanties because I want to report about these injustices. So that's why I have taken pictures. So he looks at me as going on a holiday. I was not on a holiday. I was on an assignment, journalistic assignment, trying to give voice to these people, trying to see if through this reporting you can help in making their life better. And that's a huge challenge where sometimes you get extremely frustrated and you can also get extremely depressed because sometimes your own media don't want to publish what you have written about the injustices. Then we come to anicca, or impermanence. In Buddhism, this is important teaching, and it appears extensively in Buddhist scriptures. Understanding impermanence is essential for today's communicator to report about the impact of climate change and other development issues such as changing economic indicators, the growth rates, political instability, and so forth. Now, at the moment, there are big floods in Sri Lanka. And yesterday I was talking to journalists from Sri Lanka about reporting these floods. And now they are reporting in such a way to get foreigners, Sri Lankans living overseas, and aid agencies to give aid because houses have been washed away, some people have been killed, and there's a huge infrastructure damage in the villages, so they need money to rebuild. So I was saying to him, why don't you look at, because every year you have floods, why don't you look at the causes of these floods? And if you report on that on a regular basis, at least you can put it on the government agenda that you have to address this, so that every year you don't get these floods when rains or a cyclone comes. I think the same issue was there here in Thailand a few years ago when Thailand, Bangkok was flooded. And I think the media went into these questions, and now some of it has been fixed so that the Chao Phraya don't flood too much as before. So that is what I call mindful communication. I will come to soon. So the climate is changing at a rapid pace, particularly impacting on farming environments. So as a journalist today, or a communicator, you need to understand climate change, and climate change is very much based on impermanence. Things are changing all the time. So how do you communicate that issue? By communicating that, you need to get people to realize that you have to build some form of protection against these changes. How you could change your lifestyles to cope with these changes, not blaming all the time the weather and climate change, because it's there. Okay, and of course we are talking about carbon neutral, all that, which needs to be part of the equation. These are all impermanent. Things are impermanent, and you need to see how you address this impermanence and build into your reporting the communication methodologies. So we come to mindful communication. Now, mindfulness has become an international fad. And in order to secularize it in the West, and also to satisfy a desire to improve one's concentration powers, its real mindfulness in the Buddhist teachings is vipassana bhavana. You may have heard about it, some of you may have practiced it. Now, a very important aspect of it is developing compassionate mindsets. Now, I read some time ago a report about American Marines being sent for mindfulness training. And my question was, why are they being sent for mindfulness training, if that is true? Why were they sent for mindfulness training? To shoot better, to improve their concentration, to shoot better. Now, if they also went through the compassionate training part of it, probably when they finished the course, they would have resigned from the army. Okay, so that is what is missing, and there's a lot of criticism about that approach based on, for example, CEOs go for mindfulness training. Without the compassion, they will be ruthless in making profits. Okay. And if they learn the compassion, then they may introduce things where you treat your workers better, you don't be too greedy for profits, but still you can survive. So, yeah, I mentioned to you earlier about this project at Chulalongkorn University. We were involved in developing mindful communication for sustainable development, a curriculum. Now, in that curriculum, there is what we developed is a curriculum for a semester, which is for 14 weeks. Now, in the second and third week, we included mindfulness meditation for the students. Now, that is mainly to train them to listen deeply to the people when you go to interview them, to improve their concentration power. So that's the whole thing of that training, and which is also very secular. You don't need to be a Buddhist again to go through that curriculum and that training. So in that curriculum we developed, because we looked at the concept of dukkha in the Buddhist teachings, which is, I don't want to call it suffering, let's call it unsatisfactoriness. Okay, so now when you are into development reporting or economic reporting, a lot of that concept of dukkha is mainly due to deprivations, economic deprivations, because they live in poverty. So if you are going to report about poverty, first you have to do so we have the Four Noble Truth methodology. Okay. So this is the Four Noble Truth part. Okay, first is dukkha, that is unsatisfaction, is suffering. So we need to first do the research and then go and talk to the people in the communities who are poor, who are living under poverty, to find out what the problem is. That's where we gave the training to the students of deep listening, because you have to listen to them. Very often the journalists go to these communities, they have already got their story in the mind, they want to get a quote from these poor people and then fit it into the story they have already got in mind. But that's not the methodology. You have to listen to these people and find out what the problem is. Then once you gather that information, you have done your research, you come to the second step in the Four Noble Truth, which is the cause or origin of dissatisfaction or suffering. And so when you come there, that's then you have to think. You have to start thinking why you have got the material, you have got the views from the people. So why is this happening? Is it because of a lack of service? Is it due to exploitation of the poor by employers, by developers, labor recruiters, etc.? Is it because of discrimination due to caste, ethnicity, religion, or is it because of corruption at government and business level? Is it because of favors given to investors that have chased the people out of their homes? You find a lot of it in Cambodia, for example. Then is it because of, so the list can go on and on. It depends on the local situation and could also be linked to foreign aid, investments, geopolitical issues. So you need to be mindful of all these dimensions. And this is the step to overcome ignorance, or avijja in Pali scriptures. So at this stage, you go to the third phase of the Four Noble Truths, how to help in the cessation of suffering. Now that's the step where you have got your material from the communities, talking to people, and you have thought about what is happening there, and you may have gone and interviewed government officials or whoever who are relevant, and now you have to craft a report or a communication strategy to help, not to find fingers. Very often what the media do is point fingers at corrupt officials or governments or whoever, or even the people, poor people. But you need to craft something where you will develop, you will craft a message, a report, or podcast or whatever, which could help in finding a solution to that. In a more, you need to be able to promote cooperation and to promote harmony in the society by getting people to communicate with each other rather than confronting each other. So that's the third, and then you come to the fourth part, which is how are you going to communicate that message to the community. Sometimes you can't communicate it through the media which is commercially owned because they may not agree with what you are reporting with the problem. Even sometimes the government media, government-funded media may not want to run the story. So you have to look at a way of how you put your message. Now social media comes in, this influence, idea of influencers come in, and also even we have been saying we can train, for example, Buddhist monks. They can include that messages in their sermons. So there could be NGOs who work on the field, NGO communication officers. So you have to look at the way of how to get the message to the community and to the policymakers without creating conflict. Because otherwise what happens very often is you encourage people to go out to the streets and protest, and you end up in a riot, and sometimes people get killed. But is that what you want? That's not what you need. So the communication should not be in that direction, like what you call this, what is it called, revolutions now. I say you're training young people to, in name of democracy, to create chaos in the streets. You find it happening all over. So that's a challenge we face in how to change our communication methodology. Now, in that final, so the part, in that final part, when you put the report, it covers both the third and the fourth steps in putting the report, the communication strategy together. So you follow the eightfold part, right understanding, through research and interviews and discussions. You get the right understanding. Then right thought with compassionate mindset. Right speech, being mindful of the language you use in your communications. Right action, using proper ethical channels to gather and disseminate your report. Right livelihood, no taking of bribes, junkets to write your report or compose it. Because I have come across it a number of times. You get these junkets, and then you see sometimes the people who, if you're government or whoever, when you go there, see what is happening, you have to write a report which is critical of them, and you're in a dilemma. You have got this free trip or something, and how do you do it honestly? So these are. So that's where right effort and right mindfulness comes in. Okay, finally we come to this issue of dependent origination and the sustainable development goals. Now you see the first goal is no poverty, but you cannot achieve no poverty without without addressing food security or good health services, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, environmental, good environment. So all those, so this is why one is dependent on the other. You can remember what Payutu told at the beginning. So this goes in a circle. So you have to address one by one. It depends on your situation, where you are. Like when I was in the Pacific, I was in Fiji for 1.5 years recently, And there it's more to do with life under sea and climatic change, and it's about the sea. Where in this part of the world it could be more about the land and the rivers. So, okay, I think I have almost come to the end. Yeah, just one other thing about I mentioned to you about when you have something to communicate, you you need to look at what media tools you need to use. Very often now I have had this experience. Very often you find that you cannot find, especially when you want to talk about injustices, because both the commercial media and government media will be reluctant to broadcast it. Now, I can remember when I was in Australia a long time ago, I wrote a story about this Malaysian logging company cheating the indigenous people, getting permission to log their forest and not delivering on the promises. So I interviewed people, place called Solomon Islands, and I sent a report. I was writing to a Malaysian newspaper called The Sun. So I sent a report to them. And the editor rang me from Kuala Lumpur and said, Kalinga, we can't publish this because you're talking about our parent company. It's owned by a logging company. Then they did publish it. About a week or two later, then I asked him, how come you published it? He said, no, we found you were talking about our rival company. So they were able to publish it. So these are the issues you have to face very often. Now, so that's the broadcasting model you need to. Now, sometimes we have been talking in the East, in India, for example, about this community radio, which is now who's going to fund this community radio? It's supposed to be funded by the community. So we have been arguing that, you know, how monasteries and temples are being funded in the Eastern culture, because they are being funded because community sees them as doing a service to the people, giving them spiritual upliftment, counseling, and things like that, even education. So that's why you fund monasteries or temples. Can you fund media if they do the same role? The same way, can the community fund it? Something to a smaller extent it's happening. Now, for example, we have the Thai PBS here. And I don't know how many of you are aware, Thai PBS is funded by a 3% levy of the what is called the sin tax, the tobacco and alcohol tax. And that's a big amount, about more than $50 million a year, dollars. That's why it's well funded. And it was passed during a military regime, and there has to be a constitutional amendment to stop that funding. So they don't have to go to a minister's approval every year. So they have a lot of freedom in that way. Though they have faced, I know they have faced various political pressures. Now, I know one journalist who was, he was the deputy director of the network at the time. He used to go to the villages and train people, young people, to do reports about development issues from the village from their perspective using the mobile phone. He calls it mojo journalism. And then he created a window in Thai PBS, half an hour a week, to put their programs in the, polish it up in the studio and put it in, so that way you give the people's perspective to a national audience. So so we need to look at ways of, so the question here I would end is, can the Buddhist philosophy guide the restructuring of our communication model and funding of it to create a more harmonious society? So we have to make it happen. And I don't have much faith in governments doing it unless they are forced to do it. So I will end there with just, yeah. So future journalist is not merely a reporter or mainstream media, or the mainstream media, it's a communicator. We want to call it a communicator. So communicator could be any one of you, or even could be monks, priests, any religion. So, okay, so I'll stop there. If you have any questions, you can.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalinga. Any questions, observations?
Yes, thank you for the lecture. You said that we need to create these new channels of communication, and the government wouldn't do this unless we force it. So how do you propose to force the government to do that?
It's not easy. You can end up in jail or you get shot if you try to do it. So that's where you need to do it in an indirect way, where we need to start with some, in a non-threatening way we need to do it. That's the challenge about how do you adopt a communication methodology where the people's perspective can go through. Now, I'll tell you one example. In China, what I saw. The professor in China took me there to show 3 villages near Wuhan. And she told me, because I'm an Australian citizen, I had to get, she has to get special permission from the local government authorities to take me there and give an undertaking that I was not coming to throw mud at China, visiting these communities. And she knew I will do a balance report. Then when I went there, I saw it very interesting. I spoke to an interpreter, to a professor who was interpreting, to leaders there, where they have a very grassroots development policy, where they have village committees. They meet, every village had an ancestral temple, Taoist or Buddhist temple, and they meet there. And they come up with a development project and take it to the local government office, where they have the money. The government has decentralized the budget. They give the money to the districts. So if they agree with it, or they could negotiate, discuss, and once they agree with it, they get the money. And the person who accompanied us from the government, she told me later, we try to do our best not to interfere with the way they do the project until they give us the report at the end. And if it's successful, fine. We can give them more money for another project. If it's not successful, then we have to find out what's the problem. Now, that way they have been able to get government funds without going and demonstrating and trying to challenge, but through a very quiet type of negotiations. But looks like it's working at that level. Now, you look at the villages, they are well-to-do. Most of them have 2-3-story buildings, and they call it a village. And they have farms on their garden, vegetable farms. So I thought, I wrote the article about China's grassroots democracy. Of course, they can't attack the ruling party, Communist Party. Then they're in trouble. Okay, and I found the same thing in Singapore. I lived there for 15 years. And in Singapore, it's a very safe and well-governed country. But as a journalist, I knew the rule. I can write about anything. I avoided writing about Singapore. From there, I can write about the region, no problem. But if I write on Singapore and attack the governing party, they will cancel my visa and I'll have to go back to Australia. So this is where you can't, in the Singapore context, I have discussed it with Singaporean journalists. They say, no, we can't argue with the government. that we need this type of report to go. They will see us as troublemakers. Now, in fact, when I was writing for overseas media, I did a number of reports, about 3 reports during a year, on migrant labor, how this migrant labor is being exploited in Singapore. Now, I wasn't pointing the fingers at the government. I was pointing the fingers at the recruitment agents from both sides. If they're from Bangladesh or Philippines or Indonesia, it's both sides. For example, a maid who comes to work there, for 6 to 8 months, she works for no pay because the agent takes the money as a placement fee, which is illegal in both countries. So, because they can only take up to 6 weeks. So when I ask the agent in Singapore, they say, no, it's taken by the Philippines or Indonesian agent. So when I ask the government, Ministry of Manpower, and tell them this is what I found, they say there's no paperwork. We are aware, but there's no paperwork, so we can't do anything. The government knows. Okay. So I mentioned that the government says this. So in a way, there's indirect criticism of the government. If I said the government knows this and they are encouraging it, then I am in trouble. But then after about 3 reports, one of my good friends, senior editor, told me, you better be careful, you go slow on it, don't write anything on migrant labor for another year, because otherwise the government will see you as campaigning, not a journalist, as a campaigner. Then you get into trouble with the government.
Any other questions?
Although this paradigm of journalism seems extremely optimistic for the betterment of mankind, of course, how do you counter such a meta-destructive power like we saw, unfortunately, with the administration that came into power in my country, that on day 1, they destroyed every single environmental policy.
Which country are you?
I'm sorry?
Which country are you referring to?
USA.
Okay.
I just didn't want to say it. The Trump administration, of course, destroyed every single administration policy that every single Republican or Democrat had put in place before. And then, very shortly after, his little goon, Elon Musk, got rid of USAID, which according to the Lancet, one of the most oldest British medical journals, has said will kill 13 million children by 2030. So how does this extremely optimistic paradigm of journalism counter such a behemoth evil happening in the world?
Okay, I'm not supposed to talk politics here. Okay, what you mentioned was, it's something I have been also thinking about the American media, about how they report Trump's policies. Now, if you adopt some of this, what I was talking about, this mindful communication, compassionate communication, all that, it's not reflected in the American media. Okay, they are not going to the grassroots and finding out how these policies are impacting on the people on the ground. Even now, the tariff policy, already there are some reports, mainly coming from social media, that the cost of living of the Americans are going up because of the tariff policies, because when you put tariffs, the prices go up. Now, if you go to the community and report about how they are finding it harder, you can report on that, and at the end of it you say, because of the tariffs, okay, rather than just talking about the tariffs. So the other thing is also about, there's so many things like that you can see. You were mentioning about, now when USAID was closed, there were some reports. That's also mainly in the social media sphere, about how these aid cuts are impacting people on the ground in so many countries around the world. Health services is one area. sometimes education, mostly health. So if you focus on that type of reporting, the agenda could be changed, but for mainstream media, they are not, it's not in their interest to report on this. That's why you need other type of media, which we now seem to get in plenty. Then the next challenge is, how do you judge the fake from the real? So again, you can take Buddhist principles of 5 precepts and morality, ethics, and all that, applying to what you do. So it's not easy, but we need to try to make some change. And also, one other thing I forgot to mention is, very often I find, because when I talk to Buddhist people, sometimes in Buddhist forums, about these injustices, because I see so much of it as a development reporter, about these injustices, they tell to me, oh, why do you worry? It's all in your mind. Okay, you go and meditate, purify yourself, and if everybody does it, there won't be problems. And I don't agree with it, because the problems are so much. As Buddhists, we have to do something about it, address it. And very often I have also told forums that Buddhists in Asia are very good at building grand temples, huge Buddha statues, spending millions of dollars, while the Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka, in Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar are being targeted by evangelical groups with aid funding, because they are not, Buddhists are not helping them. They are building these big temples, and so I said, you help these communities, otherwise those temples by the end of the century will be like Borobudur, with no Buddhist communities around to support them. So they will be monuments, not temples. And they don't want to listen, a lot of them don't want to listen to it.
When I was listening to you
sorry, could you come to a question?
No, she said she's not going to ask a question. Yeah, also,
Yeah, so I think like little, and when you talked about like dependent origination, it's kind of like showing people that there's no need to be afraid and stockpile resource and like eliminate enemies all the time. I think it helps. I think little parts of people drawing books online help.
yeah, so yeah, this whole idea about mindful communication for sustainable development, when we had this 1 week workshop at Chulalongkorn University, we had a Catholic academic from Philippines who attended it. And he said at the end of it, what our Jesuit priests do. Jesuit priests are this very socialist type of Catholic priests who work on the ground. It's very, fits in very well with what you have been talking about, the Buddhist concepts. So when I did the book, I asked him to write a chapter. So he wrote a chapter on Catholic mindful communication for development. And I was trying to get a Muslim. I spoke to Chandra Mustafa in Malaysia, a well-known Muslim academic good friend of mine. We had a long chat about mindful communication. And then he said how Islamic teaching could also be brought into it. So I asked him to write a chapter for the book, but he never got around to it. I think he got cold feet later that some others may not agree with him. But what he said was taking from the hadiths, the Islamic teachings, and how mindful communication, these concepts, can go together as long as we don't talk about a God, okay? Or we don't talk about the non-existence of a God. We are talking about how to apply these principles at ground level. Even the idea of impermanence was not a problem for them, as long as they don't call it impermanence. They call it some other name, I can't remember that.
Okay, I think that's a good one to end the evening. It's 8 o'clock. Once again, thank you very much for your lecture, and thank you all very much for being here and for asking a couple of interesting questions. Next week, we will go back to more hardcore Buddhism. The plan was to have a Buddhist monk, but unfortunately we had to cancel. And then we found Pandit willing to fill the gap. So next week we'll have one last bonus session with Pandit this year. And after that we have 2 more sessions, and then we have a little break over the New Year's period, and we'll continue next year again. As for today, please help us to clean up the room. The brown seats, as you know, they go to the balcony. The white seats, they go behind the curtain. And in the hallway you will find donation boxes. One is for our teacher, if you want to appreciate that he has been sharing his knowledge. You can put some money in that box. And the other box is for Valerie, for compensating them a little bit for giving us this venue for free. Thank you all very much, and hope to see you next week.
Oh, and some of us go to a nearby restaurant afterwards to continue the conversation, and everybody is welcome to join us.
How was it?